Hello, welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of Talking Baseball with Pars and Vinny. I'm your host, Vinny Masana, here with my co-host, Paul Parcelano, head coach at St. Anthony's High School. So it's been a long off-season, currently in a lockout with baseball. It gives us good opportunity to catch up and then get this going again. Pars, how's it going?
Yeah, it's been pretty good, man. It's a little cold out today, but it's not awful.
Yeah,
it's not awful.
Exactly. So we got a lot to catch up on just since the last time that this has happened. We've had a full baseball season. We had a full high school baseball season as well. And right now, the biggest thing in the news is the Hall of Fame voting. Yesterday, the announcement came out that David Ortiz will be the one player in the class of 2022. Pretty interesting situation that all the steroid guys, it was the last year on the ballot for Sammy Sosa, Curt, Schilling, Clemens, and Barry Bonds, and none of them got in. And David Ortiz, a player who was loosely linked to steroids, I guess, in the 2003 case, but never tested positive after that, so take it how you will, gets in with 77% of the vote. So, I mean, what's your initial takeaway from seeing how things shook out?
You know what, you float year to year. Now I'm on board with everybody has to be in. We talked about this before we started filming. They're the history of the game. The game has their names in it. They're attached to it. You got a 7-time Cy Young Award winner. You got the all-time home run champ.
7-time MVP.
They have to be in. You know what I mean? I think we talked about this last year. In football, O.J. Simpson's still in the Hall of Fame. They didn't remove his bust. You know, and O.J. did a heck of a lot worse than these guys trying to stay in shape to stay on the field. You know, so... the hypocrisy of it's starting to irk me because I'm a bit of a purist, but I'm starting to understand they have to be in. They have to be in, man.
Yeah, I think I've consumed a lot of content over the last 24 hours and just taken in how various people, perceive the situation. I think it's important just to kind of keep it in perspective. At the end of the day, it is just a museum. I don't think Barry Bonds' accomplishments are wiped from anyone's memories, so that will always, he did what he did on the field. But the issue is that the Baseball Hall of Fame is a museum that's supposed to tell the story of baseball. And now you can say that, as you mentioned, Home Run King is not in, and now it's official. The 7-time Cy Young champ is not in.
300 games, Clemens was
350 games. And then the all-time hit king. So you have 3 pretty significant players in the history of baseball, and they want to act like they've been wiped from the collective consciousness. And baseball has chosen to take the route of, we're going to act like this didn't happen, although they were able to profit during the time. So when you kind of factor in all these things, I think that's what makes it a lot worse. It's one thing if you want to punish guys that cheated, okay, but they're not consistent with that rule, and they need to be consistent with the rule because now you're putting, pretty important decisions in charge of people that they're humans subject to bias like anybody else. So if you're going to say there's a character clause, that should also mean that maybe people that cheated outside of steroids or people that, had domestic issues, there's a lot of different interpretations of a character clause, right?
Yeah, but look, at the end of the day, baseball's a human game, and humans have flaws, and you can go back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, and pick these players out, and there's always some stink on all of these guys, but 100%. They're still in. And for some reason, this 96 to 2005 group are the ones really getting penalized for this. And we all watch the games. I love the late 90s seasons, the early 2000s. As a Met fan, we were really good.
It saved baseball.
It saved baseball. We were running out of gas. We had the 94 strike. The 95 season was the Indians and the Braves, I think. Was
95.
The Yankees were in 96 against the Braves, right?
Yeah, 97 was a good one.
Baseball was kind of teetering. NBA was hot. You had Michael Jordan. The NFL, obviously, is always a beast. And baseball was just starting to go down, and then came the Sosa-McGuire chase. And that's the other thing. Why does Sosa only get 10%?
Yeah, and McGuire fell off the ballot.
Those guys, their numbers are astronomical as well. They never even got a chance. You know what I mean? And Sosa, I think he had like 12%, and now he's out too.
Yeah, and he never had more than that.
Why isn't his name in the conversation? Because he's a little crazy, he's got some issues, but...
Well, I think that brings me to another issue, is the issue with the writers. I think maybe it's time to switch to another format, whether it be current Hall of Famers vote, current players vote. Maybe there's some sort of weighted system.
Don't they have a veterans committee and a gamers committee?
Yeah, but that's after they fall off. So now these guys, the Clemens and the Bonds, they'll be eligible for today's committee, but they're even stricter because it's a lot of guys that are adamantly against letting steroid users in. So that's why it's pretty much a closed book situation, I would say. But as far as the writers go, they also allow their personal vendettas with individuals get in the way.
Yeah.
You know, Albert Bells of the world, Eddie Murray. Murray ended up getting in, but he was
His
notorious, right?
Great. His numbers were great.
Because back then it was 500 home runs meant you were in. But they've
3,000 hits. He had 3,000 hits as well.
Yeah, they've allowed their personal vendettas get in the way, I think is the biggest issue. You look at Ortiz. He was known as a good guy. He gave good sound bites. He had the famous speech after the Boston Marathon bombing. All that stuff kind of built up goodwill with him in the community and with media. And then he went on TV, whereas Bonds, you know, aside from being the hitting coach for the Marlins for a little while, went out of the collective consciousness of people, and Roger Clemens never admitted to anything. So Ortiz, in the mind of the sports writers, this Dan Shognessy's of the world, no, he's good. He talks to me. He gives me good quotes. But Bonds, because you know he turned their back on them 20 years ago, they'll never forget that. So to me, that's kind of the issue: is the so-called gatekeepers, and they're trying to keep the game pure. They're probably doing a disservice at this point.
It's funny. What's the criteria? Is it statistics? Is it championships? You know, I guess NFL and NBA, the championship is the difference between the great players, right?
Yeah.
Baseball, not so much, right?
Yeah.
You guys it's usually the numbers that dictate it. Mm-hmm. We're talking about guys with the best numbers in the history of the game over the 150 years of the game. Mm-hmm. And I know the steroid. I know that 400-pound gorilla's in there. At the end of the day, if it's a numbers thing, it's the body of work. That body of work is insane.
Yeah.
And I know there's that faction that says, well, the numbers wouldn't be that great if they weren't juiced. I don't know.
Not the case with them.
Barry had, 490-something home runs before the year 2000? Mm-hmm. And that's when they said he started taking, 2000, 2001,
4
apparently,
MVP,
even though he never failed the test.
3 MVPs already at that point. How about this? This was a mind-opening comparison that I saw. Roger Clemens' career, essentially, if you broke it down into 2 parts, was Pedro Martinez and Sandy Koufax. If you combine their careers, because you talk about the short-term dominance that Sandy Koufax had with the Boston, almost the same numbers that Pedro put up in Boston, that's what Clemens was in Boston. You combine those two, you have 350 wins, 7 Cy Youngs, the 20 strikeout games. So look, we spoke about it on last year's episodes with his situation with Piazza, and as Met fans, we'll always harbor that. But you wouldn't allow that to get in between voting for a guy for the Hall of Fame. You're not going to say he's got mental issues. I don't want to. It's baseball. He performed on the field, as you mentioned. They did it on their own merit. So that's kind of where I stand with it. And now that the book is closed, it also kind of irks you a little bit more because it's there's not next year where they're going to...
Those guys, maybe their name will pop up in 5 years or maybe... I think December is when the next
they
group
can
votes,
do
right?
today's... Yeah,
but they're not putting them in this year. No shot.
No, and a lot of those people, they just have ill will towards them, and I just... And also that today's committee, they're lumped in with umpires, owners, managers. Yep. So I think they can only have 10 people eligible, and they're going to be splitting that among 3 different factions of baseball.
And you got other decades. There's a lot of 70s guys they're talking about
I think it's any year from 88 on. So you're talking about a large pool of players.
Of players that have been waiting. I know Ted Simmons just got in recently. I think Tony Oliva's in. But those were always the standard guys that were just underneath.
Yeah.
They finally got in. So I guess down the road. But what's different? Baseball has an image issue. Mm-hmm. We can't promote our best players. Basketball does a great job. Football does a great job. And they wear helmets. You don't know what they look like. But you know all the top NFL players. Mm-hmm. Baseball guys get lost in the shuffle. So they do have to move into the 21st century a little more and promote the game in a different way. Yeah,
and one point you had before we started filming, you had mentioned Harold Baines. That's kind of symbolic of baseball's image issue because you're talking about a player that even if you grew up in that era, you would never associate him with being a all-time great. But he's in, and there's players that are significantly better than him.
Baines was a 25-90 guy. You know what I mean? And he played forever, but I don't think he has 3,000 hits.
No, he had 2,700-ish.
40 home runs?
Yeah.
Literally, he's a quality left fielder for a decade. There you go. You know what I mean? But
which segues me to another point because there are guys that seem to be trending in the right direction, the opposite of the Bonds and the Clemens. You had Todd Helton, Billy Wagner, and Scott Rowland all get an uptick in votes. I believe Wagner was 51%, Rowland was around 60-ish%, and Todd Helton was about 57%. In your opinion, you don't think any of those guys stand out as all-time greats, right?
No, maybe... Look, Helton and Rowland were really, really good. I guess that's in there in that Tony Oliva kind of Ted Simmons, maybe even a
Yeah.
Fernandez, Mattingly kind of. They're really close, and they had good numbers. They had great seasons. Billy Wagner, he accumulated the numbers. He has a massive amount of saves, and he was dominant for what, 3 different clubs.
Yeah.
I see you pulling up the Helton numbers.
Yeah,
Helton's numbers were great, but
well, I think there's a couple. There's two.
how many hits does he have? 2,500.
2,500, but I think Helton's an interesting case because his peak was so high. So if you got away from the 3,000 hits, 500 home runs, the next tier is kind of, all right, did they have a really strong peak? And if you look at his numbers in the late 90s, early 2000s, it's almost
crazy, right?
Look at this stretch from 2000 to 2004. He was top 20 in the MVP all 5 of those years, Silver Slugger, Gold Glove, all of those years. And his 2000 season is historic because he had 59 doubles and 42 home runs. That's over 100 extra base hits.
That's an insane year.
147 RBIs, and people scoff at it because it's Coors Field.
Yes.
A lot of people played at Coors Field. You don't see people...
He still played 80 games on the road.
Yeah, exactly. And those are pretty good as well. So, I'm not going to be passionate if Todd Helton doesn't get in, but he's probably better than some other people that have gotten in recently.
But if we went down and did a deep dive on this, Helton had a 5-year stretch where he was the best first baseman in baseball, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Mattingly had a 5-year stretch where he's the best player in baseball. He has an MVP. He has a batting title. He has, 10 Gold Gloves. He batted, there was the 85 year, we batted, 340 with 38 homers, 650 double.
Yeah.
Similar numbers to that. Don doesn't have a chance. He's off the ballot.
So let's say Helton's not in the situation, not in the conversation if he doesn't get in. Wagner's an interesting one because you have the two schools of thought that's, well, he's as dominant of a left-handed reliever ever, and then you have the people that say he didn't get it done in the postseason. Now, I tend to think the postseason is kind of irrelevant in this matter because you're not. If he did well, that wouldn't necessarily put him in the Hall of Fame.
No,
so why would
relievers dominate in the postseason that aren't in the Hall of Fame? It's a different cat. You're playing
exactly. K-Rod had one of the best postseasons of all time when the Angels won in 2002.
But he's still pitching in Korea.
It didn't get him into the Hall of Fame. So I look at it as, the body of work. Is it there? Did he have a strong peak? Wagner was one of the best left-handed relievers of all time. He was an automatic 1.5 strikeouts per inning, basically,
and
over the course of
he was good from start to finich.
Yeah.
He never had a fade.
I'll pull up his numbers right here. Billy Wagner, 1995. I didn't expect him to come into the league at that age. 900 innings, 1,200 strikeouts. I mean, that's ridiculous. In the era where it wasn't like today where everybody strikes out, 150 times a year with under 1 whip, 2.3 ERA. I mean, I don't know what anybody wants in that situation. And he pitched till he was 38. It's not like he was 45, where if he did, maybe he had 600 saves.
What was his appearances his last year and in his prime? All the same, right? Same amount of appearances?
Games, 70. Yeah, usually around 65, 70.
So he was lights out until 38, never retired.
Yeah, if he would have stuck around, like some of the Hall of Fame pitchers, like a Goose Gossage or something.
That slid into the setup role, middle relief role.
He basically never had a period of time where he was. His last year he had a 1.4 ERA.
Yeah.
So for me, that's a Hall of Fame numbers.
But closers are finally getting their due. So he is one of the best closers of all time.
A 7-time All-Star.
Well, he's got to be top 10. So he deserves to be in.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a changing of the guard with how they interpret relievers because kind of the jobs have changed. It's not going to be the typical 500 save, a reliever that only comes in for a save anymore. You're going to have guys that are middle relievers that don't get the saves but are just as impactful maybe as closers used to be. So I think that also is like a philosophical debate is, what are you looking for in a reliever? In the case of Wagner, he was kind of that last frontier where you only brought him in if it was 3 runs, but you can't really knock him for that because that's the way the games were.
Yeah, he never pitched double-digit innings for the Mets. Not that I can recall. He was a 1-inning guy.
Yep.
If it was tied or we had the lead.
Yeah, and the old school thought was he never brought him in if it was a tie game on the road too, which was always a strange
which they've
way
changed
of thinking.
Now. Yeah. Oh, remember I brought this up. It was just kind of off the Hall of Fame thing, but we talked about openers and having the starters come in behind. So now you have.
And now
DeGrom pitching in the 7th inning, and now guys are starting to buy in on it. It's a genius move.
Yeah,
it's a genius move.
Yeah, and when Brian Kenny brought that up, that was like heresy to say because everybody wanted to have, you get excited when when you walk past a stadium and you saw the starting pitcher's name, and that could still be a thing, but there's not many players that you're going to bend over backwards anymore. You know,
No,
there's
they're too
DeGroms and there's Scherzers, but there's not a lot of guys in that category.
No, and wouldn't you rather watch DeGrom and Scherzer pitching in the 7th and the 8th at 70 pitches as opposed to pick some middle reliever that roll your dice?
Hansel Robles.
Hansel Robles. I always go back to Hansel Robles.
I know. I remember from last year. And we had talked about Roland last year because he was kind of in the same situation where he was, around 40 or 50% with the votes. And a lot of people are passionate about his candidacy against him because if you look at it, 2,000 hits, 300 home runs.
2,100 hits? How many hits do you have?
Almost 2,100, 2,077.
So it doesn't hits.
Does not jump off the board. But when you look at the new age stuff, 70 WAR, which has been the new kind of buzz number if you have around 70. And then also if you dive a little deeper, Gold Gloves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So he definitely was an all-around player. I don't know. It's not somebody that I'm going to fight for one way or the other. I could see it. 8 Gold Gloves, 7 All-Stars, Silver Slugger, World Series, Rookie of the Year, 70 WAR.
Why can't that just be a great career?
Yeah.
Why? But like I said, it's the Harold Baines syndrome.
Yeah.
If Harold Baines is in, Scott Rowland, I guess should be in because he was a dominant National League third baseman for a decade. Yeah. Right?
And then the other player that didn't get as much love this time around, too, is A-Rod. I put him in a little bit of a different category as, David Ortiz because with A-Rod, it just always seemed like he was in the news for negative stuff. So if you want to knock somebody for character flaws, maybe it's somebody that lied on national TV multiple times.
He did.
But obviously, if you're going by pure numbers, he's right there with Barry Bonds. He almost had 700 career home runs, and he had 3,000 hits. I think like 4 guys.
Though, Ben, How do you deny those numbers?
It's just somebody that I'm not as adamant about just because
you don't like him? Well, there it is.
Yeah.
Well,
you know what? Maybe he just has to wait a little bit. That's what will end up happening instead
of
putting in him
like 38% or 39% or something.
Yeah,
like that.
but once the Clemens and Bonds and Sosas are off, maybe he's more on the forefront of the conversation because he's going to be the biggest. He'll be the biggest name. Well, let me ask you this: next year is Beltran. Is he a first ballot Hall of Famer? You think? And does he go in as a Met?
I think after the managerial disaster.
See, if that doesn't happen, I think it's more of a no-brainer than it is. He's got the one World Series. People don't realize he actually
How many hits
played.
Did he finish up with, like 2,700 or something?
2,700. Yep. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So for a center fielder, that's significant because that's not a corner infielder. 435 for a center fielder is right up there with besides Willie Mays. That's like the next best with 312 steals. So pure numbers wise, he's there.
100%.
I would say if he goes in, it's probably as a Met because
he'll go in as a Met.
He came up as a Royal and he played 7 years, but people didn't even know he existed until he had the breakout postseason in Houston. So I think this will get talked about a lot because of the first time guys next year, he's far and away the best player of the bunch.
Beltran in his prime, Ortiz in his prime. Who would you rather have?
I would probably say Beltran because you're getting base running, defense, and hitting. Ortiz, we couldn't put him in the field unless it was Game 7 of the World Series in the National League Park, and he was an albatross on the bases. So
he's a first time. He'll go in next year unless the writers, once again, we were talking about before.
If they want to hold it against him with 2017.
That he cheated, that he was the ringleader of Garbage Can Gate.
That's going to be the subject of a lot of debate next year because it is cheating. It is a character situation. However, he at that point of his career in 2017, he was more of a coach in the dugout than his 2017 season. He hit 231. So if he was cheating, it didn't help him that much at the plate. He was probably helping Alex Bregman and Jose Altuve a little bit more than that. So
see, that's another thing. Baseball, they just let that thing fade away. And people will always hold that against the administrator, whoever's in charge. I know it's Manfred and stuff.
Yeah,
that was a mistake. There should have been a penalty for that. And I know you don't want to take away championships and stuff.
They gave them immunity to tell the truth, which is ridiculous because they could have just got to the bottom of it without offering that. That was definitely my issue with it.
Don't you think that's more disgusting than the steroid era? Because those guys were just trying to stay on the field to put up numbers, and the baseball was fun to watch, and home runs and everything.
And everyone was doing it. This
is gross. This literally, you cheated your way into a World Series. Yeah. This should be a bigger thing than the steroid era, personally.
COVID probably helped the Astros' case. They played a season without fans, so the vitriol was a lot lesser in 2021 than it was in 2020. and it wasn't in the news because there was a pandemic. So if there was ever a time to be under the crosshairs of Major League Baseball, it was when, in March of 2020, I guess.
Funny, I want to see if Correa signs with the Yankees. Are we going to see Correa jerseys in the stands? Of course we will, because if he came to the Mets, I'd do the same thing. I get it.
I think Yankee fans' brains are in a little bit of a pretzel with that, because on one hand, he would certainly move the needle to make them a better team, but he also was probably their most hated player over the last 5 years since Ortiz has been retired. So he's kind of the new
poor Yankee fans, because that is going to be a dilemma, because they're going to have to support him, because that guy's a game changer.
He's going to help them win. So even if they don't get him, I would love to see who is going to. He's going to get $350 million. So it's either going to be the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Red Sox, some team that has that kind of
story. Maybe they get him.
I could see it. That would be probably in the fans' eyes, the lesser of two evils, but somebody that can make, that can be a game-changing player. So one other thing I wanted to touch on before we move away from the Hall of Fame stuff. What do you think is a better way to do it? Do you like just continuing down this road of the Hall of Fame writers? Do you think maybe they phase out who's able to vote and try to get those, the guys that haven't been covering the game actively?
I like that. I like the idea of the writers choosing the players because they've been doing it forever and they follow the team. But there's got to be better criteria. They got to make some absolutes. Is character the thing? I know it has to be incorporated into their decision making, but at the end of the day, if it's a numbers game, which baseball completely is, the numbers have to dictate whether you make it in or not.
And they could make it easier for them if you have decent guys that have good intentions, in my opinion, like the Ken Rosenthal's of the world, who do this for a living. He's as tuned in as ever, and when he's conflicted over who to vote for, what is the 75-year-old writer that hasn't actively covered the Kansas City Royals in 10 years, and how are you going to ask him? How are you going to ask him who to vote for? So
there are dudes that send them ballots empty. Or pick one guy. I saw one ballot was nothing, and they picked like Jeff Kent.
A handful of people left it empty. Some people just voted for guys that had no connection to steroids.
Those guys got to lose that right. Give it to somebody else. I agree.
Or what they could also do is say, all right, if this player is deemed to be connected to steroids, he's ineligible. Then just take it off their hands, so that they don't need to.
But you know how gray area that is. Who did? Who didn't? You know what I mean? He didn't test positive, so did he do it? We all kind of know. We knew Barry Bonds when he was at the Pirates and Giants. Something's different there, whether he passed the test or failed the test. But I could say that about any player from that era.
Yeah. How do you know who's clean?
Was an Adonis. When he first came up, he weighed 175 pounds. And in his prime, he was just his butt was up by his shoulder blades. He was a strapping. He got played 162 every year for a decade. How does that happen?
It's a good point.
You know what I mean? I'm not saying Derek Jeter did stars, but you can start pointing out guys left and right.
It's just hard to say who did or didn't do it.
So let's just let it go and put them all in.
Exactly. So I think we'll close a chapter on that for now, because you can definitely go down a rabbit hole of steroids and stuff. At the end of the day, whatever they're doing now is proven to not work. That's kind of where I stand. Because if it was people are in their 8th or 9th year, and we could talk about, are they going to get punished next year? Now the book is kind of closed on that. And like you said, they're losing core audience that seemed to be going to be a fan for life. Now maybe they've had enough of
and you got fans that have been fans for 40 or 50 years that are getting grossed out by this, or that are moving away from the game.
Yep. And if they're not getting grossed out by that, then maybe with the lockout situation, what brings me to that. So the last couple of days, we've had some good news. They've met the owners and the players, of course. Previously, they hadn't spoke for 43 days. After their initial meeting and during the winter meetings, they had met for 7 minutes, and they weren't even on the same page. So my takeaway is that that's a good thing. I'm coming from the perspective of I want there to be baseball. I get it that, maybe it's not a good thing if they're not addressing the issues at hand, but my priority is I want to see baseball. So that's number one for me. Obviously, unless there's nefarious ways that they're trying to undermine players, but assuming that they're
on the level?
Yeah, that they're speaking the same language now is my biggest takeaway, I think. Before this, it was they make an offer, the players make an offer, the owners don't even respond to it.
Yep.
They counter with something, the players laugh at it, and then the lawyers just speak and yell at each other. Now, you got people that are decision makers that are in the same room that it seems to be moving in the right direction.
I think everybody's on the same page that they can't let this stretch out. I think everybody, maybe not so much the players, but definitely the owners understand that they can't let this linger on. Especially with this Hall of Fame voting, and it's starting to cause some,
turmoil.
Baseball's not like that. They don't like that. Baseball's a sport that's there every day in the summer. It's part of people's lives for 6 months. It's so different than the other sports. I think something will get done. And look, I think in 2 weeks you're going to see an arbiter come in, and a third-party guy will come in. They'll both deal with this guy, and they'll compromise, and away we go.
Yeah, I'm of the thought, why don't these people just get locked in a room and just hammer out all the details? Obviously, they're not doing that, and they operate at their own pace, but sometimes it just gets frustrating because it's like the whole month of December they didn't have any contact. That could have been, so going back to Manfred and the poor job that I think he's done. His company line on December 1st was they're gonna have the lockout so that they can force them to have meaningful conversation. They didn't have any conversation, so obviously it wasn't to make progress, it was to make a point, and they wanted to shut the doors on them to say, this is the power that we have and you guys can't do anything about it. I want the players to get paid. I want, for a long time, I think the balance of power was in the owner's hands.
Sure.
But at the same time, I don't think they're getting bent over a barrel. The minimum wage is...
They want to bump it up to $7.70. I think it was $5.70.
Yeah,
the minimum
which
wage
to me that's promising because like I said, they're talking the same language. They're offering one thing. They're going to likely settle in the middle. You would think, right? It's one thing if they said we want to get a percentage of the gate, and they said we're offering $500,000. That's a non-starter then at that point. So, look, I hope the season starts on time. I would say, gun to my head, at this point, it seems like they would. Maybe they get a little bit of a delayed start to spring training.
But we talked about this before we started filming. The players are all working out. It's not like the 70s or 80s where guys are off doing their own thing, sleeping on their couch and just waiting to be called and then go back and get in shape. They're all going to come to spring training in shape. So this could literally go to, maybe the first, second week of March. And within a couple of weeks, maybe, April baseball might be ugly, but they might start on time. I'm optimistic on that.
Yeah, and this is something that we've seen coming. Going back to the, March of 2020, when the season got pushed back because of COVID, a lot of the writers were speculating if they can't play this year because of COVID, there's a good chance that there's a lockout after 2021. What would that do to the core base? If they didn't get their shit together in 2020 and they couldn't get a season, this could have potentially been 2 years.
2 years without baseball.
Yeah, and that would have, and there's not a lot of other fans like me that would have just ride and die with anything that they do. It would have been completely damaging to the game at that point.
I think they overestimate us because they know we'll come back. They know Met fans and Yankee fans, as soon as the game's run, we'll watch it again. No matter whether we waited 2 years, a year, or 6 months.
Yeah.
But like I said, just constantly punching the fans in the chest over and over again with stuff like this.
And the quotes that some of the owners make. How about this? I don't know if you saw this yesterday. The owner of the Rockies, Dick Monfort, who basically gave away his best player that, of the last generation after Todd Helton retired. Nolan Arenado was an 8-time Gold Glove winner, All-Star, one of the best players in baseball. Gives them away to the Rockies for low-level prospects.
And pays the bill.
And pays it. And then he says yesterday that baseball owners are not making as much money as you would think, and that that the pandemic put a real hurting on their pockets, basically. Do you think how do you think the public perceives that?
Billionaires can't cry wolf, man. Yeah. They just can't, and no one's going to take them seriously. And I don't take it seriously. You didn't make as much? Come on, man. Come on, man.
Yeah, if you say I didn't make as much as I was expecting, that doesn't fly with the public, everyday people. So to me, that's my takeaway. They need to clean up definitely how they present the news. Also, it's one thing what goes on behind closed doors,
they're not transparent. They don't give us information. Everybody's in the dark. Even reporters are in the dark.
Yeah,
there's no communication. There's no spokesman coming out saying here's an update on a Tuesday.
Which great point. Sorry to interrupt you, but the guy that was a great reporter, they kicked him out. Ken Rosenthal. He's the guy that has he's trying to do the best job that he can.
And give information to us so we know what's going on.
No, he's a guy that's been doing it for 30 years, doesn't have an ulterior motive, and they ban him from the MLB network.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, what is baseball doing? Come on, man.
And they didn't even announce that. That was only found out by other reporters that basically spread the word. So it's a mess, and they're lucky that there's a lot of diehard baseball fans that will be there through thick and thin, because if this happened in soccer or UFC, in America, maybe where it doesn't have as strong of a following, people would just be out on it. Yeah. So, that's definitely the most damning
Remember,
thing.
We got college baseball and high school baseball. So.
Yeah, and there's no lockout there. So that is that's good news, I guess, if you're a baseball fan like us. So before we sign off, just want to give a change of tone a little bit. Awful news last night. Comac coach Bryan Bonin passed away. Awful situation. 33 years old, battle with cancer. Outstanding coach, outstanding person. I've had nothing but good interactions with him over the years. He took over in 2017, and I remember it vividly. I talked to him at the coaches meeting, introduced myself. I had never heard of him at the time, and he was a gentleman. He welcomed me in like I was family to the Comac program, and led him to a county championship their first year and in his last year. And it was, you could have made a movie about it. The team knew about his diagnosis. They rallied around him. They won their first Long Island championship in program history. I mean, that's a script that they would turn away in Hollywood. It's almost too cliche. And the shame in it is that at that time, we were hoping that he was going to be back for another year. And, life had other plans. Unfortunately, he was taken from us. And our condolences, thoughts, and prayers go out to the Comac family, Comac community, the Bonan family, and just an awful loss. And just glad that he was able to go out with the championship, if there's any silver lining, because he was a winner and he went out on top. And guys, thank you for tuning in to Season 2, Episode 1 of Talking Baseball with Pars and Vinny.